Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about pencil barrels and why they suck. So what's a pencil barrel? That's just a colloquial term for a sporter barrel, a thin profile barrel. There's a few different names that people throw around. A barrel that is quite thin and tapers from the shank down to the muzzle. The reason why you would want a pencil or a sporter type barrel is to conserve weight. If for a hunting rifle, you're going to be lugging around a bull barrel out in the bush, so you would go with a sporter barrel, hence the name sporter barrel. It's for sporting shooting, which back in the day sporting shooting was hunting, and now sporting shooting is like PRS and shit. Anyway, so I did a little test with my Ruger M77. Now Ruger M77s are notoriously inaccurate. They did have a problem with their barrels. Their barrels were made by some sort of other company that wasn't Ruger back in the 70s, 80s. Eventually, when they went to the Mark II, Ruger started making their own barrels. The accuracy got a lot better. By bad accuracy, I'm saying that they were, a MOA to a 2 MOA rifle. But for hunting, particularly for the day, 60s through to the 80s, the style of hunting was generally fairly short, so up to about 300 meters. They weren't really too concerned with like the ethical kill thing, so they didn't really give a shit if they wounded a deer. They would just, shoot it again. But let's talk about that inaccuracy first, because that'll probably set the tone for the rest of the video. So when I say inaccuracy, I mean, an MOA to 2 MOA. We'll talk a little bit about group theory. 1 MOA at 100 yards will be roughly 1 inch. It's slightly over an inch. So let's just say it's 1 inch. 1 inch at 100 yards. You need to subtend that, so at 200 yards it's going to double, which means it's going to be 2 inches. At 300 yards it means it's going to triple at 3 inches. 400 yards, 4 inches, etc, etc. Extrapolates out. So let's say it was 3 MOA at 100 yards, then that would be 6 MOA at 200 yards, so a 6-inch group. So about that. So if you think about the kill size of a deer, and let's talk about, we'll talk about Americans real quick. They say that the kill zone of a whitetail deer is about 8 inches, so about that, usually the size of a standard gong. If you're grouping within 6 inches at 200 yards, and your kill zone's 8 inches, even though it's not grouping very well, you're still getting within the kill zone, and you can kill a deer shooting it outside the kill zone as well, so you do have a bit of fudge factor there. So that's why they didn't really give a shit back in the day. Now, obviously, these days, accuracy is way more popular, and people want to stretch that further and further. The better rifles have got and the better ammunition has got means that we can shoot further and further, more accurately, and get ethical kills further. So that's the group theory thing out of the way. So the reason I'm making this video is I've had a couple of comments on a few of my rifle videos where people are saying, oh, pencil barrels are rubbish and they're no good and they're inaccurate and you shouldn't use a pencil barrel and blah, 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 blah. And I can't be bothered going back and finding the exact comment that spurred me to do this video, but it's around there somewhere and I can't remember what bloody video it's on. So I went and did a test with my Ruger M77. I fired first I had to zero the rifle, and we'll jump into that in a second, but then I fired a 3-round group, spacing the rounds out by a few minutes, and then I fired a 3-round group by not spacing the rounds out. And then we could see the size of the group change. So we'll dispel the first myth first, and that is that pencil barrels are inaccurate. They're not inaccurate, they just can't group as well. Accuracy and grouping can be the same thing, but can also not be the same thing as well. So when I went to zero the rifle, I bore sighted it. I fired 1 round. I then made the adjustment, brought it back on for line, fired another round, and it ended up being bang on where I needed to be for the zero that I was using for that rifle, being 2.5 inches high at 100.
There you go. Right where I fucking wanted it.
So if it was an inaccurate barrel or an inaccurate rifle, I would not have been able to make that adjustment. And it wouldn't have fell in where I needed to be, because I obviously calculated I needed to come left X amount of inches, made the correction on the scope, and then it went where I wanted to go. So that means that it's not inaccurate, because accuracy is putting the bullet where you want it to go. Tick for that one. Grouping though. So firing a 3-shot group with, it was about 5 minutes between shots. So the barrel was warm-ish, not hot to the touch though.
There's a group there.
Now, so as you can see, that group is about 1.5 inches. So an MOA and a half, roughly. For a hunting rifle, that is perfectly acceptable because we talk about group theory again. So doubling at 200, that's 3 inches. It still means it's probably a 300 or 400 meter rifle, but it doesn't mean it's too inaccurate to hunt with. You just got to know your limitations there. Now, just because it has a thin barrel doesn't mean that that's the reason for that size group either. As I said, those rifles are fairly inaccurate, and I've shot rifles with thick barrels that are just as inaccurate or even more inaccurate at shooting a group. So I think that's a bit of a moot point. And then fired a 3-round group with absolutely no gap, so this was just bang, bang, bang.
So we've got first shot, second shot, third shot. That's fucking woeful. One, two, three.
And then we can see how big that group opened up. And that was about 4 or 5 inches. That's at 100. So if you extrapolate that out, triple it to 300, 5 inches, tripling it, it's 15 inches. That's fucking huge. If you're firing 1, maybe 2 rounds in this rifle, yeah, acceptable. If you're doing like bench rest shooting or PRS, then yes, it is not accurate enough for that because you're firing long strings of rounds. Some PRS comps you're firing, 80 or 90 rounds in a string. Bench rest shooting, you're firing 10 to 20 in a row fairly quickly. So different rifles and different profile barrels have different applications. Now, just because you're reading online that bull barrels are more accurate, think about what they're talking about though. What's the application for that rifle? It's more accurate for insert discipline here, PRS, bench rest, F-class. So I think people cherry pick information a bit here and there and just sort of formulate their own opinion based on little things they find. It's like saying, oh, a Toyota Hilux, that's a rubbish car because I read somewhere that it's not very good at the quarter mile. Yeah, okay, it's not designed for the quarter mile, is it? It's designed for forward driving. Same as you wouldn't take a fucking Ferrari forward driving and saying that a Ferrari is a bad car because it can't drive off-road is probably a moot point because it's not designed for that. So what am I trying to get at? I'm trying to get at that people need to stop cherry picking information from here and there and think about what the application for these things are and understand that different things have different applications. I don't want to be walking around in the bush with a 24 to 26 inch bull barrel in a bloody chassis. Yes, it's probably more accurate than any of my hunting rifles, but it's not designed for the application I'm using it in. The heavier it is, the more fatigued I'm going to be carrying it. And then, can I shoot it offhand, which is what you're usually doing when you're hunting. Walking around, seeing an animal, and then offhand shooting the animal. If you're carrying around a big bloody chassis, then, no good. So let's talk about sported barrels real quickly, right? So they're nice and thin. It's going to have a certain harmonic value to it. The longer and thinner a barrel is, the more the harmonics are going to affect that. So when the bullet's passing down the bore, it's going to do more of these ones, big wavies. If you have that same length barrel, so let's say 24 inches, and then make it thicker, then obviously there is less harmonics going through it, which means inherently the accuracy node and the harmonic node is going to stay the same between rounds, which means it will group better. If you were to take a sported barrel that's 24 inches and then shorten that down to 18 inches, the 18-inch version of the same profile would be more accurate than the 24-inch version of that profile. The reason being, the shorter the rifle barrel is, the more consistent the harmonic node is. So to summarize that little part, a thin barrel that's long is less accurate than a thin barrel that is short. A thick barrel that is long is just as accurate as a thick barrel that is short. It all depends on the harmonic resonance. When we talk about super, super lightweight barrels, let's talk about the SMLE, because most people are pretty familiar with that. The reason it has wood all the way down to the end with a nose cap is because it needs to have support on the barrel. There's 7 pounds of pressure applied by the nose cap and the spring assembly onto the end of the barrel. And if you look at an SMLE, if you're going to go buy one, just a hot tip, look at the muzzle, and if the barrel is not sitting up hard against the top of the nose cap, it means it doesn't have the correct amount of pressure, which means it's bedded incorrectly, it's probably going to be inaccurate. Now, why is that important? It's important because a lot of people like to sporterize Lee Enfield rifles, right? They sporterize them, cut all the wood off, they free float the barrel, and then they wonder why it shoots like shit. Completely inaccurate. And I think that's probably where some of this, sported barrels is the inaccurate thing comes from, because you now don't have the bracing applied by the wood around that barrel. The harmonics go way out and your groups get massive. That's the reason why they invented the heavy barrel for the SMLA. It wasn't invented for the army, which is a common misconception. It was invented so that sporting shooters in the interwar years, like the 1930s, could use free-floated and or short foregrips on their sporting rifles. It wasn't until the Second World War we had the great gun buyback, where the Australian government bought back sporting rifles off sporting shooters and then used them to make sniper rifles. That's a little bit of random history for you. So in that instance, yes, a pencil barrel is really, really bad, and you need to have the correct amount of support. This leads me back to the Ruger M77. At the end of the forend, it has a little bit of rised wood. That is there to support the barrel. Because the barrel is so thin, it needs support in the forend. A lot of people have gone and free-floated their Ruger M77s, and I'm talking about the old ones, not the new ones, and then wondered why the accuracy got worse than better, because not every rifle barrel is designed to be free-floated. That's generally the rule of thumb now. It's like, oh, is it free-floated or is it not free-floated? If it's a thin profile, it probably needs to be bedded instead of free-floated. That's just helping the harmonics stay the same. The same as when you have a plastic or a synthetic rifle stock and you flex the forend. The more you flex the forend in between shots with a different amount of pressure is going to push differently onto the barrel, which is going to change your harmonics, makes your group get bigger. So there's just a quick little rant about that. Look, I know that got a little bit preachy, and it is what it is. I'm a little bit passionate about lightweight rifles. That's kind of my thing. So there you go. Sported barrels are not inaccurate. Sported barrels are accurate for what they're designed to do. A heavier barrel is more accurate. It's designed that way for a certain application. Anyway, I hope you got something out of that. I'll see you next video, and hooroo.